Hey guys, welcome back. There's a lot of noise today. It's really hot outside and the dogs don't want to be there. Hopefully they will cooperate and we can get through this video. If you're new here, hi, hello, welcome. Please subscribe. This episode is about the friends that went out that night. It was supposed to be a fun night out with friends and ended in the tragic death of John O'Keefe. But the Commonwealth still hasn't told me how, when, or why. So, like I told you yesterday, we're dealing with a lot of sickness here, pneumonia, bronchitis, whatever. Hopefully today I can get through this a little better than I did yesterday. I guess we should just dive right in. Okay, let's see here. Let's start. We're going to start with Michael Camerano. He's lived in Canton for 18 years. He's married to Catherine for 25 years. They have 2 kids, a 13-year-old boy and a 16-year-old girl, and he works for the laborers union. He met John O'Keefe 7 years ago through mutual friends Kurt and Carrie Roberts. Their kids were friends, and he and John were close friends. His wife works weekend nights. She's a nurse. Friday nights, he was with the kids, and they usually went over to John's, and everybody would just kind of hang out. He knew Karen Reed for about 1 year, and he knew that she lived part-time with John. He would see John a couple times a week, and he would also see Karen. On this night, they were celebrating because their daughters had just got accepted. John's niece and his daughter had just got accepted to a private high school called Bishop Fian, I think is how you pronounce it. It sounds like they say fan, but they've got that accent, so I think it's Fian. And they were super excited. They had just got their notification letters, and they were so proud of their kids, and they just wanted to go out and celebrate. So they started off the night at C.F. McCarthy's in Canton Center. They were supposed to meet Karen Reed there. He drove John to the bar in his car. John left his SUV at home. The top picture shows it's Ring camera footage, and that's John walking to Michael's car. Kurt Roberts joined them about an hour later. They had texted him to come, and apparently they called him a pussy, and he said, I couldn't just let that go, so I had to get up there. This is some footage from inside of C.F. McCarthy's. Let's see. In the top video, you can see that's when Karen Reed got there, when she's joining them. The middle picture, you can see her and John together at the bar. And the third picture I have highlighted because that's the glass that we are going to hear about all through the trial that Karen Reed was drinking out of. It was a tall cylinder glass with clear liquid, a straw, and a lime. There's been assumptions it was some sort of vodka drink, but people have also testified that if she was drinking water or was drinking water in between vodka drinks, you'd never know because it was just a clear liquid. Let's see. He talks about how John was kind of OCD, and he gets a laugh for that. He liked to keep his house really nice and tidy. He liked to keep his garages in order. He made you take your shoes off when you came in the house. he just had a lot of these little quirks. He was a neat freak. He said that night that John wasn't wearing a coat and that he never really wore a coat that Michael could recall. And you can see here, he's got, if it's a jacket, maybe, but it looks like a lightweight hoodie, which is pretty consistent with what everybody has testified to. So Michael ends up having to leave. Kurt left first. He did what they called the Irish goodbye. He just slips out and didn't say anything to anybody that he was leaving. And then Michael left about 15 minutes later because he got a call that his son had got hit in the face with a hockey stick and lost a tooth, which is like the most Boston thing I've ever heard. He told John or Karen that he was leaving, and they indicated to him that they were going to go across the street to the waterfall. After picking up his son, he went back to John's house to pick up his daughter at 11 o'clock, and then he went home and he went to bed, and he left his phone charging in the kitchen. On January 29th, he woke up at between 5:30 and 6 a.m. to his personal phone ringing. He has a business phone as well as a personal phone, and he woke up to his personal phone ringing. He sees that he has missed a bunch of calls from his wife, calls from Karen Reed, and calls from his wife's work. So he calls his wife, and she tells him that John didn't come home last night and that she had gotten calls from Karen Reed. She told him to go get Kaylee at John's house because she was home alone. Let's see. He said when he got there, the right garage door at John O'Keefe's house had been left open. He went inside there and he cleared the snow with a shovel because he knew that John would be upset if he came home and there was snow in his garage. He was trying to get the garage door down and it wouldn't go down, so he had to manually close the door. He finally got it closed, he locked it, and they went out the side door. And that's a picture of him when he came to pick up Kaylee. He said that Karen Reed and John's vehicles were both in the driveway, and he didn't reach out to John at any point, which I thought was really weird because you could tell this guy was a really good friend of John, that he really cared. So I just thought it was kind of odd that when he heard that, you know, John didn't come home, that he didn't at least shoot him a text and say like, hey, where you at? But he didn't. So he picks up Kaylee, they go home, and she's hanging out downstairs with his daughter, and he took Kaylee back to John's after Paul called him and informed him that John had passed away. On Cross, they talk about how his kids vacationed with John O'Keefe and Karen Reed sometimes. He trusted his kids in their care. He never saw John and Karen argue. He told the grand jury, quote, I wouldn't even call it bickering. They would just banter together. He said John complained when Karen would buy very nice things for the kids. John didn't like that. Like, if she would take them to get their nails done and, you know, something like that, he would say, she's spoiling the children. But there was no abuse. John's ideas about raising kids were just more conservative than Karen's. Karen got Kaylee, John's niece, a very expensive sweater, and John O'Keefe said, I wish you wouldn't have done that. That is spoiling that little girl. John never even hinted at breaking up with Karen Reed. On January 28th, when Karen Reed walked in to C.F. McCarthy's, they had an affectionate greeting. They kissed, they were happy to see each other, and there was no arguing. And these are pictures of when she comes in. You can see them together at the bar. He's got his arm around her. he reiterated there's no tension that night. Everybody was having a good time. He said their relationship the month prior was totally normal. And the day before John's passing, their interactions were normal, caring, and affectionate. And that was it for this witness. Next, we had his wife. Hang on. Sorry. We had his wife, Catherine Camerano, take the stand. She has lived in Canton since 2005. She's been married to Michael for 20 years. They have 2 kids, a 13-year-old boy and a 16-year-old girl. She works as a nurse, and she's been doing that for 21 years. She and John were close friends. She had known Karen Reed for 2 years and saw John about 3 times a week. She said that he had an app on her phone that when someone would enter the house, like if a door would open or close, it would send her an alert at work, and that's kind of how she kept up with, who was home when and what time people left. She said that they had gone out as couples with John and Karen a few times, but the kids were usually around. There were no sleepovers allowed at her house. And then at 4 or 5 a.m., she said that Karen called her and she was screaming, "Where's Mike?" repeatedly. So she's trying to calm Karen down. She checked her alarm and she said, "He's at home with the kids." So she proceeds to call her husband, which she says it felt like 100 times. Because remember, he had all those missed calls, so she probably did call a lot. Karen told her that John didn't come home and that's not normal. In her first call with Karen, she heard Kaylee in the background. She called her husband Michael and he never answered. She called Karen Reed or Kaylee, she can't remember. She texted John twice. She was on the phone with Kaylee and she heard Jen McCabe in the background. Now, how she knows this, Jen McCabe was one of her daughter Madeline's basketball coaches, so she said that she knows her voice just from hearing it like on the sidelines. So she talked to Kaylee. She asked, is everyone okay? And said that they were getting ready to go out looking. She texted Kaylee, "Is Karen alone?" She said no, she's with Jen McCabe and Carrie. When she heard Carrie Roberts and Jen McCabe in the background, there was a lot of screaming. She heard Karen Reed say he's not home. She was trying to text and call between patients. She said Karen was frantic and screaming. She talked to Carrie Roberts and Carrie Roberts told her that John was going to the hospital. She called her husband to go get Kaylee. She said that she's known Carrie Roberts since high school. They were friends with her cousin. They've been friends for quite a while. And then they showed the text messages between Katie Camerano and JJ, who is John O'Keefe. That was what they called him, was JJ. Her texts to John were at 5:10 a.m. No response from him. Then she had conversations with Karen Reed. They show her the call records. That's what I have up here. At 4:49, Karen Reed called her. At 4:56, she called Karen Reed. 5:32, she called Karen Reed again. 5:34, she calls Karen Reed again. It's a missed call. And at 6:44 a.m., she calls Karen Reed again, and it's not answered. And then they show the text messages between her and Karen. It starts out with, "Are you okay?" Karen doesn't respond, so she sends back, "Go home so you're safe with Kaylee. I'll bet he'll end up on someone's couch." Nothing from Karen. So she asked again, what's going on, Karen? At 5:53 a.m., Karen Reed texts her back, I'm driving around with Carrie and Jen. She says, okay, is one of them driving? Karen Reed says yes, and she says, okay, keep me posted. So she's at work and she's going, in her mind, trying to figure out where could he be, where could he be? And she's texting Karen and she says, could he be at his brother's or his mom's or at the station that he works at? Karen texts back and says, I don't think so. His brother is in Westbridge, which is, I guess, short for West Bridgewater. She says, right, I know, I'm just brainstorming. And Karen says, it's okay. At 6:34, she texted, any luck? And Karen Reed texted back, he's dead. She texts Karen and says, what, Karen? Are you serious? Karen, do you have any idea where he is or did you find him? And Karen Reed said he was in the snow. She hasn't had any more communication with Karen Reed since that final text. She hasn't talked to Carrie Roberts or Jen McCabe about what happened. She's asked on cross-examination if she tried to text Karen after, and she says no. And she also says that she wasn't aware that Karen's phone was seized. And that's it for her. And now we're moving on to Kurt Roberts. He was quite a guy. He cracked me up. So this is Kurt Roberts. He lives in Canton. He's been there for 12 years. He's married to Carrie for 15 years. They have 2 kids, a 12-year-old boy and a 14-year-old girl. He works as a heavy equipment operator. He's been doing that for 25 years. He's friends with Michael Camerano. He met John through his wife, Carrie, and he's known Karen Reed for about 2 years. He says, Michael and John reached out. He knows Michael from 6th grade. They both grew up in Milton and are friends. Michael's kids are around the same age as his. They played baseball together. Their sons did. He knows John because when John's sister and brother-in-law passed away, John moved into their house in his neighborhood, and his wife knew him previously and introduced them. The house was not far from them. When he moved in with his niece and nephew, Patrick was the same age and same baseball team as his son and Michael's son. John moved to One Meadows 2 or 3 miles away in approximately 2019. He met Karen Reed a year or 2 before they came over to his house. He knew that she was John's girlfriend. He didn't talk to John regarding, anything personal about their relationship. John and Michael were at C.F. McCarthy's. He says that he didn't want to go out, and I don't know what he said he was doing. He was working on something, but he didn't want to go out basically because of the weather that was coming in. And he says, he proceeded to call me a pussy. I can't let that happen, so I had to go. He says it was about a 2 or 3 mile drive to McCarthy's. He got there about 8:20. And John and Michael were there when he got there. I'm going to play a video for you of his testimony just so you can get a feel of what this guy is like. Here, let's go.
With regard to that particular evening, January 28th, 2020, you mentioned at some point Mr. Camerano and or Mr. O'Keefe reached out to you.
They did.
And what was that in regard to? What was that conversation?
They reached out. They were at McCarthy's, the bar in Canton Center. And they wanted me to come up. And I was saying, no, I didn't want to. I want to stay because there was a storm coming. And then he called me a pussy. And I'm sorry. I can't let that happen, so I had to go. So I had to go up there and.
Do you recall who it was that called you that?
It was Michael Camerano.
So, like I said, I love this guy. He kept it real. He said that they were at the bar on the left-hand side. He gets shown the McCarthy's surveillance video. This is a picture here I circled. That is him at the bar. And you can see John McCabe right there. And Michael is in the blue baseball cap next to Kurt. He says that he stayed about an hour. Karen Reed had joined them before he left. He was home by 10:15. His wife and kids were in bed. He went to bed about 11:30, 12 o'clock. Michael Camerano left about the same time as he did. And then on to the 29th. So he said he woke up, he heard a voice on his wife's phone screaming. He couldn't make out the words, and he found out it was Karen Reed. This was at about 5 a.m. His wife got up and ran out. He tells her not to go because of the weather, but she goes anyway. She says, "John's missing, I've got to go." She left within 15 minutes. She drove a gray Ford Explorer. She called to say that they found John and he was in an ambulance going to the hospital, and that she was going to go get Mr. and Mrs. O'Keefe, John's parents, who live in Braintree. He snowblowed the driveway. He said there were like 1-foot snowdrifts, and his wife came home at 8 a.m. He says that he never saw John with a puffy jacket. Going back to the EMT's testimony, he said he talked to Karen Reed before leaving about 10 to 20 seconds face to face, and there was no indication that she was drunk. There was no evidence of any problems or arguing between John and Karen. They weren't complaining about each other. He said Karen Reed was caring towards the kids. And then Lally comes up, and for his redirect, this is what we got. He's not aware of what went on behind closed doors with John and Karen. Well, no shit. Nobody is, right? And that's it for Kurt. Now, this next one isn't a friend. It's the bartender from the waterfall that night. Her name is Rebecca Trayers. She lives in Canton. She grew up in Canton. She works as a bartender at the waterfall. She's been there for 7 years. She was previously a bartender at other bars in Canton for about 4 years, and she was working the night of January 28th, 2022, when his group was there. She gives us a description, of the bar. It's in a condo complex. It's got 4 entrances and exits. There's a front and back patio, tables, bar. There's 4 low tops and 6 high tops, if I'm reading my notes correctly. She says the restaurant and kitchen are downstairs. She serves drinks and takes food orders. They have regulars. They serve beer, wine, and mixed drinks and cocktails. Lally asked her where they bought their glasses from, and she says they got them from Restaurant Depot. So I don't know if he's going to have somebody come in from Restaurant Depot and say that the glass that they found in the snow was from the waterfall. I don't know where that was going. On January 28th, they had a band. They've got cameras inside and out. They show her the waterfall surveillance video. And they show her the video from the parking lot by the front door, the inside camera showing the lounge area. She points out where the band plays. She shows where the high tops are. She shows the bar. The high top closest to the bar is where John and his group were sitting. At 12:01 a.m. on the video, we can see that the lights are on in the bar. The band is done. Everything's starting to wind down. We see her at 12:17 taking trash out of the front door. She says she knows of John O'Keefe, that he had been to the waterfall a couple of times. She knew his first name and that he usually ordered beer. She said he ordered a beer that night. At the end of the night, she said they were the last group to leave and they were at the high top closest to the bar. John was standing with them. And then we go on to how she knows everybody else. She said she knows Chris Albert. She knows of him. He comes in every few months. She knows Brian Albert. He was there. Brian Higgins. He'd been there on prior occasions with Brian Albert. And then she tells us that the state troopers had come in and got receipts from that night. She says that she knows of the Albert family. They're all well known in Canton. She knows 5 members of the family through being a bartender. That would be Brian Albert, Chris Albert, their wives, and Caitlin Albert. Caitlin is younger than her, and she saw her that night. She saw Brian Higgins. She knows him from the waterfall. She said John was in a good mood, and apparently he's a good tipper. So, there's that. And she ended by saying that nobody seemed overly intoxicated. And that was it for Rebecca. Now we're going to get back into some friend adjacent people. I'll explain why. This is Nicholas Kolakithis. I hope I said that right. He lives in Canton. He's lived there for 21 years. His wife is Karina. They have 2 daughters. One is 16, one is 18. He is an attorney, and he's been doing that for 27 years. He's known the McCabe's for 9 to 10 years. He knows the Alberts through Jen McCabe. He knew John O'Keefe for years, and he met Karen Reed in 2020. He said he saw John weekly because of their kids' basketball games. Okay, let's see. He said that John and Karen came into the waterfall at about 11. John's niece is the same age as his younger daughter. They played ball together. They've been friends for years. We find out what he's drinking, what John was drinking. The mood was good. It was fun. There was no arguing between John and Karen. There was no arguing with anyone. He tells us what he saw John wearing. He didn't have a jacket on. There were no tears in his clothes. There were no injuries to John O'Keefe. He said that Matt McCabe had told them they were at McCarthy's and were coming over to the waterfall to see the live band. He said there were people talking about going to D&E's or 34 Fairview. D&E is diagonally across the street. Chris Albert owns D&E, which is a pizza place. I think I mentioned it in my last video. He said Brian Albert invited the whole group to his house, but he and his wife didn't go. They left at about 12:10 a.m. That's a magic number in this case, 12:10. And I don't know what the significance is, but I'm sure we're going to find out. He said that he and Matt stayed back a little bit later, just a couple minutes. They kind of started helping clean up. They were talking to the band. He said that his wife, Jen McCabe, and Karen Reed walked out first, and we see surveillance video. He's wearing plaid. He points out Matt McCabe, and he points out John O'Keefe. On Cross, we find out that he met Karen Reed at the end of summer 2020. He was dropping his daughter off at John's house. Karen had organized an elaborate birthday party for Kaylee's 13th birthday, and his daughter went. They socialized as couples 5 or 6 times. There was no tension. They were a normal, loving couple. They were affectionate. There was no indication that they weren't getting along. And then he says, no, hang on. He says he spent more time with John than Karen, and that John was excited about rekindling he and Karen's relationship from 2004. John and Karen got to the waterfall at 11. John said they were planning vacations in the future. He said nothing eventful, no tension, no fighting at the bar between John and Karen. He says, quote, "In fact, I noticed the opposite. They were being loving and affectionate to the point that his wife even asked, 'Why aren't you like that with me?'" Karen was singing John's praises about what a good father he was. He says that he didn't see anyone sparring with each other with their fists up. In the video, you can see Brian Albert and Brian Higgins. They're kind of, crouching down and, doing this kind of thing and grabbing each other from behind and things like that. And the defense has been characterizing this as practice fighting, sparring. I don't know. There's a few other ways that they've put it. But John O'Keefe was not a part of it. It was strictly Brian Albert and Brian Higgins. On redirect, Lally gets that he never talked to John or Karen about their personal relationship. On recross, he said that Karen was singing John's praises about how good a father he was. And that is it for him. Next, we have his wife, Karina Kolakithis. Again, I hope I'm saying that right. If I'm not, I'm sorry. She lives in Canton. She's lived there for 21 years. Excuse me. I thought I was going to make it without a cough this time. Her husband is Nicholas. They have 2 daughters, 16 years old and 18 years old, and she works as a pharmacist. She's known the McCabe's for 9 years. She has known John O'Keefe for 8 years, and she met Karen in 2020. She knew John better than Karen, and she says that she saw him all the time. On Friday, she worked. Then she went to Canton Junction at about 6 p.m. The parents of the basketball varsity team were meeting up to eat before the game that night. The game was at 6:30 at Canton High School. She says she got to Canton Junction at 6. They went to Canton High School. After the game, she said that she was going home. So she went home. She got some text from her husband saying that she should join and get something to eat. She was tired, but her kids told her that she should go and at least keep Dad company while he's eating dinner. So she gave in and she went to the waterfall. She got there at about 9:30. She said that she saw Matt McCabe, Jen McCabe, and her husband when she walked in. She said it was extremely loud because of the band. She said that she drank water because alcohol gives her migraines. And for me, this was kind of interesting because everybody else that night has been drinking something alcoholic, except we're not 100% sure what Karen Reed was drinking. We just know that she didn't appear drunk. This lady was drinking alcohol because it gives her migraines. So I felt like she was probably pretty clear on what she was testifying about. So she said Jen McCabe's family was at the table, but she didn't know them. Jen McCabe introduced some of them to her. The mood was happy. Everybody was having a good time. There were no issues or arguments the whole time. She said Karen and John came in as she was about to leave. So she hung around for a little bit. She said that John's niece and her daughter are friends. She's known him for 8 years. She met Karen Reed at Jen McCabe's house in 2020. She knows John better. She saw him all the time. Her husband coached John's niece's basketball team. John and Karen came in at about 11 o'clock. John was really happy and excited for Kaylee getting into Bishop Fan. She tells us what he was wearing. that there were no tears in his clothes. She said there was nothing out of the ordinary with John and Karen's interactions. Everyone was having a great time. She said John was moving around and Karen was with her and Jen McCabe. She said Karen talked to Jen first. She tells us again about Karen having something clear in a glass. John had a beer. They had come from across the street at C.F. McCarthy's. She said that she talked to Karen and Jen quite a while. She said that Karen said she admired John for how much he did for the kids and how she looked up to him for that. How much he sacrifices. He puts everything he's got into the kids. And she wished other family members would step up because he took on the brunt of it himself. She wished they had more time to go out on dates and vacations. She mentioned that they had a trip that she was excited, that they had planned a trip that she was excited about. She talked about going across the street to D&E. The owner was there, which is Chris Albert, and he said no. Karen seemed willing to go. Discussion was brought up by Jen McCabe. Let's go to my sister's house. She's never been there. It was an open invitation to the group. She said, anyone who wants to go, we can go to my sister's house on Fairview. They didn't go. They just went home. John and Karen were quite lovey-dovey at that point, she said. That's probably when she made the comment to her husband about, why aren't you like that with me? She said Jen McCabe grabbed Karen Reed and said, you're coming with me. Karen said, where are we going? Jen said, it doesn't matter. It will be a surprise. Her, Jen McCabe, and Karen Reed walked out together. John wasn't with them when they walked out. Then she saw Karen with John outside the waterfall, and she thought that was weird because she thought that Karen was going with Jen McCabe. Karen and John were walking in the same direction as she was, towards a black SUV that she thought was Karen Reed's vehicle. Karen was walking towards the driver's side. You can see them exiting on the waterfall video. You see John going to the door, the outside camera at the waterfall exit. On cross, she says Karen always had a way of complimenting John. John was excited about the trip that he and Karen Reed had planned together. It's about a 5 to 7 minute drive from Waterfall to 34 Fairview. On redirect, Lally gets that she didn't have a conversation with John regarding Karen that night. John didn't tell her personal things. And again, she doesn't know what goes on behind closed doors. And on recross, Jackson brings up the fact again that they were observed to be lovey-dovey. And that was the end of her testimony. So, that's it for the friends. Next, we're going to start getting into the Alberts. Specifically, first will be Chris Albert and his wife, Julie Albert's testimony. I'm going to do a video on just those two and their testimony because there's some absolute consistency in their story and some inconsistencies in their story. And I feel like it's going to matter as we go. So I'm glad that I'm keeping this notebook because as I'm going through it to make these videos, I'm catching things that maybe I didn't catch the first time. Like, hey, that's weird because this person said this. So I'm really happy that I'm keeping such copious notes on this trial. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. A lot shorter than the last one. I'm hoping that all of them will be more manageable chunks like this. Thank you for putting up with my dogs, my cough, and all of that. Please like the video. On the last video, I got quite a few views, but only 4 likes. So if you're watching, just go ahead and give it a thumbs up to boost it in the algorithm and get it out there. Share it. Subscribe if you aren't already. And pop off in the comments and let me know what you're thinking about this trial. What did you think about the friends and the bartender's testimony? What they observed that night versus what we hear coming from like the Alberts and others. These were friends, like they'd been friends for years. So how much weight do you put on what they witnessed that night? Do you think they're credible? I thought they were. I don't see that they had any reason to lie. I quite enjoyed having the friends up there. But the next video, like I said, we're going to get into Chris and Julie. And then after that, it will be Brian and Nicole Albert. It's a whole thing with Brian. He could probably have his own video. But that's what I'm working on. Bear with me. We're going to get through it. And as always, I will see you in the next one.